The second part of the security workshop is around authorization and audit via Apache Ranger, which is a comprehensive authorization and audit tool for Hadoop. As a first step, we would be installing Apache Ranger. Secondly, we'll be syncing users between FreeIPA and Ranger and showing how end users only need to be maintained in one identity management system. Next, we will be configuring HDFS and Hive to use Ranger. And finally, we will show how you can log into Hue as the end user and note the authorization policies being enforced and review the audit information. By the end of this lab, we will have demonstrated how all user access to HDFS and Hive is governed and audited by policies maintained in Apache Ranger. Let's start by downloading the Ranger Policy Manager and the user group sync agent. The Policy Manager is essentially the web UI from which you control everything, and the user group agent syncs users between LDAP and Ranger. So we're going to do a wget from the Hortonworks website. After untarring the files, we're going to go into the Policy Manager directory and open up the installed properties. There's no real changes needed here. We're just going to confirm that the values look as below. Authentication method is none, remote login enabled is true, the service host name is localhost, and port is 5151. This is essentially the port for the user group sync agent. So let's run the install. For username and for passwords, we're just going to enter Hortonworks for both the passwords, and if everything goes well, at the end you should see XA Policy Manager has started successfully. Next, we're going to configure and start user group sync agent. You go into that directory and open the install.properties and start making changes. So the Policy Manager URL is the sandbox host on port 6080, which is where the Policy Manager runs. Sync source is going to be LDAP. The sync LDAP URL, we're going to pass it to the IPA server, ipa.hortonworks.com, port 389. The LDAP bind DN, we're going to pass in the UID of the admin. So admin users accounts Hortonworks comp. Bind password we're going to put as Hortonworks. The user search base is going to be users accounts Hortonworks comp. And the LDAP username attribute is going to be UID. Once those values have been saved, we're going to run the install and then the start the service. We can run a ps-ef to ensure the agent started, and we can look at the log file for more details, and in this case it shows that it's already started to pull the users. So it pulled 12 users so far. At this point we can open up the Policy Manager web UI and log in as admin on port 6080. Under the user groups tab, we should be able to see all the users at this point. Next, we're going to set up an HDFS repo in Ranger so we can audit some HDFS directories. So we'll specify the repository name as HDFS sandbox. Username and password is going to be the XA Policy Manager username that we had created in LDAP. The rest of the values are actually going to come through Ambari, but I'm just pasting it here from the text file I have. So authorization is true, authentication is Kerberos. For the auth to local, it's a large string in the Ambari settings, so I'm just going to copy it over from there. So under HDFS configs, you can do a filter on auth to local. And just copy the value from there right into the XA Secure form. The principal for the data node is going to be the dn prefix, sorry. And for the name node, it's going to be the nn prefix. And similarly for the secondary. We save that out. And now we're going to install the HDFS plugin. We're going to go back to our XA-Secure directory and download the plugin for HDFS. Untar it and open up the install.properties. And very similar to what we already did, we are going to set up the install.properties. Policy manager, once again, it's sandbox port 6080. The repository name is HDFS_sandbox. This has to match what the repository name we set up earlier. And then the DB values are the same as the example, except that for the password, we're going to specify Hortonworks. If you wanted, you could have actually verified that using that MySQL command above, but we don't need to do that. Let's run the install. And once that's done, we need to make a couple of changes in Ambari. So we go into the HDFS settings and change the DFS permissions enabled to true. But before restarting HDFS, we have to add a snippet to the bottom of an Ambari template file so that it knows that whenever we restart HDFS, to restart the Hadoop security agent as well. So we're going to do a VI on the Hadoop config shell script. And add the entry over there. And now we're good to restart. So here I just restarted the data nodes, but actually we need to restart all of HDFS. Next, we're going to create an HDFS directory called Ranger Demo, which we're going to try and access using different users and see how we get along. So let's try logging in as the Ali user, su Ali, and try to access this directory. So let's do a klist first. We don't have a Kerberos ticket. Do a kinit using Hortonworks password. If we try to access the Ranger demo, it fails saying permission denied. At this point, we can go to the Ranger Policy Manager web UI and go into Audit. Under Agents, first of all, we'll see that we successfully registered that agent. And then under the Big Data tab, we see the audit. So here we see the Ali user tried to access Ranger demo directory but was denied. So now let's go ahead and add some policies in the Policy Manager and give Ali access to this directory and see what happens. So we're going to create a new policy for /Ranger demo for the Ali user and give him read, write, execute access and do add. Note that you need to wait 30 seconds after making changes to policies via Policy Manager for them to be respected. Now let's go back and rerun the same Ranger demo access through HDFS, and this time it succeeds. Let's go back to the audit trail and see what we see. And we're going to do a filter by repository type HDFS, by user Ali. And here we see the second time, the first time that it was run, it was denied. And the second time that Ali tried to access at 522, the resource Ranger demo, it was allowed. So now let's try the same exercise with the different user HR1. So I'm going to SU to user HR1. And try to access that same /ranger demo directory in HDFS. It fails saying couldn't find a Kerberos ticket, so we're going to do a kinit using Hortonworks password. If you need to change it, you can actually change it back to Hortonworks, that's fine. So now that we have the ticket, let's try and accessing that Ranger demo directory again. And this time we get the permission denied from XSecure. Querying on HDFS type, now we see HR user tried to access that and got denied as well. So now let's go back and go to the policy and add the HR group as having access to that directory. So you can actually modify the same policy. And once you do that, we need to wait another 30 seconds. After 30 seconds, we run the same command, and this time it succeeds. So even though we did not directly grant access to HR1 user, since he is part of the HR group, it inherited the access. And as you can see, the second time round, HR1 user was able to access the Ranger. Next, we're going to set up the Hive repo so we can do similar audit and policies for Hive. So in the repository name, we're going to set up Hive_sandbox. Username password is going to be the same. Driver class, we're going to put org Apache Hive JDBC Hive driver. And JDBC URL, we're just going to point it to port 10,000 of Sandbox. Save that out. Then we're going to install the Hive plugin. So if you go back to your XSecure directory, we're going to do a wget for the Hive plugin this time, similar to how we got the HDFS plugin last time. After it downloads, we're going to untar it and open up the install.properties and make the same changes we made last time. So with the policy manager, point it to the policy manager on port 6080. Repository name, again, we're going to keep Hive_sandbox because that's what we named it in the Ranger UI. And then the DB host name, everything is the same except for password, we're going to put Hortonworks. Save that out and start the install script. Here we need to change one of the Ambari template files that start the Hive server. So the recommendation here is keep a backup of that file and then just replace the contents with the ones provided in the text file. On changing that template file, you have to restart Ambari server and agent. So let's do that real quick. And then we can copy the Ranger files to the etc. Hive conf directory. Then there's a number of Hive config changes we need to do in Ambari. So next step is to open up Ambari and go into the Hive config. Since we restarted Ambari, we have to re-log in. So the first four are pre-existing properties that we need to change. So we're going to change the authorization manager to the XA secure one. Authorization enabled is already true. We don't need to make any change there. And then add the Hive exec pre-hooks and the post hooks. So this is how the Hive agent is hooking into the into HDP. Then the last three parameters are in the custom Hive side. So you have to go all the way to the bottom to the custom Hive side and do add property. And then we can change add the Hive semantic analyzer hook. This will be again the XA secure semantic analyzer hook. Then change the custom authentication class. This will be the XA secure login name authenticator. And set the value for HiveConf restricted list to this list over here in the file. Just copy and paste it from there. So at this point we can save those changes and then restart Hive from Ambari. At this point it seems the Hive restart usually fails because the metastore doesn't come up. So we need to go ahead and restart the MySQL. So as you can see, the Hive restart failed. If we go back to the Hive summary, we see the MySQL is stopped. If we click on that, we can go into the MySQL server and restart it. Once that comes up, if we go back to our Ambari dashboard, we notice that there's some problems on HDFS. Let's click on that. We notice that one of the data nodes is down, so let's restart the data node. And then at this point, since Hive didn't restart cleanly the first time, let's just go ahead and restart it again. Once that's done, let's go ahead and restart the Hue service to make it aware of the Ranger related changes. So with that, we've completed the config for the Hive related changes. Now we can go ahead to do some audit exercises. So let's create a user directory for the Ali user. Let's sign out of Hue and sign back in as Ali using Hortonworks as a password. Need to refresh the page. And let's run a basic query so we can check if the Hive agent shows up in the Ranger UI. So let's go into the Ranger UI under Audit, under Agents, and we see that Hive agent is up now. And we may not see anything in the audit yet, but let's go ahead and create some policies. So let's create a Hive policy for the early user. To add new policy, database is default, table, let's pick sample underscore 07. Let's pick 2 columns so that this user Ali cannot access the whole table, just the code and description columns of this sample 07. Under user, put Ali, give him select, and do an add. And let's create another one for sample 08, the same database, but this, for example, let's say all columns. So the Ali user should be able to access all columns of sample 08, has full access from a reading perspective. Again, we need to save out and wait 30 seconds. You can look at the policies you just created under Analytics. So here, for example, we can see the previous one we did for HDFS. We can see the new ones we created for Hive, for sample 07, sample 08. And we notice that we only have partial access to sample 07, but full access to sample 08. So now let's go back to Hue and run a query on sample 07, and we got a table not found. Let's just rerun it. And now we see that user Ali does not have select privilege on sample 07. Now let's go back to the XA Secure and look at the audit. We'll do a repository type of Hive to filter everything out. And here we see for the Ali user, when he tried to access sample 07, the request was denied. Let's do a select star from sample 07. Again, this should fail because there's no access, and again it does. Let's confirm on the Ranger UI. Now let's run a query that should work. So let's only select the code and description from sample 07, and we notice it's going to work. And the query worked. You can go back into the Ranger UI and look at the request, and we see in the audit it was allowed, and we see exactly which columns were requested. Let's do the same with a sample underscore 08. Again, we can access sample 08 because the policy, and when we set up the policy, we specified that the user can access sample 08 table. Let's try a simple query as well, just to be sure. Again, it's sample 08, so it should work, and it does. Going back to the audit, we see that this has also been audited. So that was at the user level. Now let's try to do the same at the group level. So let's create a Hive policy for the group legal. So database is default. Table is sample 08. Let's try to first give legal group all access to sample 08. You can just add something into the name of the database if you want to create a policy with the same name. And now under the analytics, we can see our new policy. Legal groups have full access to sample 08. Let's wait 30 seconds. In the meantime, we can go ahead and create the user directory for user legal 1. And now instead of running through the Hue interface, let's try to go through Beeline. So we're going to do a SU as legal 1, do a kinit with Hortonworks as a password, change the password back to Hortonworks, and now let's try a Beeline. We're going to enter for the username legal1, password is Hortonworks. We're able to connect. Let's run some queries. So currently legal group has access, so the query works. Let's go back and change that so that they're only allowed access to columns code and description. Save the policy, go check it out in the Analytics tab. And now when we run the same describe, we get the failure that they don't have privilege. And if we go back to the audit and search filter by repository type Hive, we can see that the legal 1 user's request was denied. Select star results in the same thing, same error, and we see it comes up in the audit page similarly. Now let's try a query that should work. Only select code and description columns from sample 08, and this works. And we can confirm by looking back into the audit trail, and we see that indeed the request was allowed. So that brings us to the end of part 2. Using Ranger, we've successfully added authorization policies and audit reports. And we can show for both HDFS and Hive how all the accesses can be governed and audited by Apache Ranger.